When three college friends set out for a weekend in Yosemite, they promised their families they'd be back by Monday. Instead, their car was found abandoned at a lonely trailhead. Keys in the ignition, gear untouched, as if they'd stepped into a forest and simply evaporated. For 7 years, no one knew if they were lost or if something much darker had claimed them. What was eventually found, deep inside an uncharted cavern, would unravel a truth far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. On a crisp April morning in spring 2018, the Sierra Nevada mountains were just waking from winter. Snowmelt ran in icy ribbons through gullies, and patches of wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth. To most visitors, Yosemite was a sanctuary. Sunlit cliffs, towering pines, and a silence so profound it felt sacred. For Eliza Hartman, Connor Hale, and Lila Moreno, it was supposed to be nothing more than an adventurous weekend escape before the pressures of graduation set in. The three had been inseparable since freshman year. Eliza, the daughter of two physicians, had spent her college life under the crushing weight of expectation. Every choice, her classes, her internships, her volunteer hours, was calculated with one goal in mind: med school. She was the planner, the one who kept their group organized. Connor was her opposite in many ways, an engineering major with an easy grin, and a reckless streak that often landed him in trouble. He carried himself like someone who believed the world would bend to his will. And then there was Lila, soft-spoken, artistic, a psychology student who painted her notebooks with delicate sketches when lectures grew too heavy. She often played the peacekeeper when Connor and Eliza's strong personalities clashed. On April 14th, they borrowed Connor's aging Honda and headed north. According to their texts, they planned to scout a little-used trail, spend a night under the stars, and return Sunday evening. They never came back. The first sign something was wrong came Monday morning, when Connor's father, Frank Hale, tried to call him. The phone went straight to voicemail. At first, Frank wasn't alarmed. Cell service in Yosemite was notoriously unreliable. But when Eliza's parents reported the same thing, unease began to spread. By that evening, Frank had made the 2-hour drive himself and found the Honda parked at a remote trailhead. The doors were unlocked. The keys sat in the ignition. A bag of chips lay half open in the back seat. It looked as though the trio had only just stepped away. Search and rescue teams scoured the area. Dogs picked up a scent that trailed into the woods, only to vanish at a rocky outcrop. Helicopters combed the cliffs and riverbanks. Rangers questioned other hikers, but no one had seen the three students. Within days, their faces were plastered on missing person posters across California. News outlets ran the story under grim headlines. 3 students vanish in Yosemite. For the families, the waiting became unbearable. Frank Hale, retired from law enforcement, took a leave of absence from his part-time security job and poured his life into the search. He retraced trails, talked to guides, pinned maps across his dining room wall. He knew his son. Connor wasn't careless, not when it came to the outdoors. Something didn't add up. Eliza's parents, meanwhile, insisted their daughter had always been cautious, methodical. She would never willingly stray far from a marked path. And Lila's mother, who lived in San Diego, pleaded with the press not to forget her daughter, her quiet, gentle girl. As coverage began to fade, weeks passed, then months. Rumors flourished online. Maybe the 3 had run away together. Maybe they'd fallen victim to a predator. Maybe they'd joined some cult in the woods. None of it fit. By fall 2018, with no new leads, the official search was scaled back. For most, the case faded into the background. But for the families, the silence only deepened the wound. Behind the scenes, Agent Dana Kessler of the FBI kept the file open. Something about the disappearance gnawed at her. She'd seen plenty of lost hiker cases. But this was different. The abandoned car, the lack of gear, the sudden cutoff in communication. It all felt wrong. Still, with no bodies, no evidence of foul play, her hands were tied. The Sierra swallowed secrets whole. And for 7 years, Yosemite kept this one buried. In those 7 years, life of the families fractured. Frank Hale never stopped searching. His once orderly house became cluttered with maps, boxes of notes, half-finished cups of coffee. His marriage, already strained, collapsed under the weight of grief. Eliza's parents clung to the idea their daughter might still be alive, refusing to hold a memorial service. Lila's mother slipped into quiet despair, her health deteriorating. The trailhead became a pilgrimage site. Every April, Frank returned there, standing by the Honda's last known resting place, staring at the forest as though sheer will might force it to give up his son. What no one could have known was that, just beyond the tree line, less than half a mile from where the car was found, there was an opening in the earth, a narrow slit, half hidden beneath decades of moss and leaves. A wrong step could send someone plunging into the dark. That's where the trail of footprints had vanished. That's where the real story began. By the summer of 2025, drought and erosion exposed more of the hidden crevasse. A pair of veteran cavers, Mark and Evelyn Crawford, exploring the area, stumbled upon it. Curious, they squeezed inside, descending into the damp, suffocating dark. Their headlamps swept over crude carvings on the cave walls. Initials, dates, desperate messages scratched into stone. And then, deeper still, they found what law enforcement had been searching for since 2018. A hidden chamber, a makeshift living space, and the remnants of lives that hadn't simply vanished, but had been trapped. The discovery reignited national interest overnight. Media vans crowded Yosemite's entrance. Search teams swarmed the cavern. Families who had waited 7 years for a closure braced themselves for answers they weren't sure they wanted. And when the journals were retrieved from that underground chamber, carefully preserved, filled with meticulous handwriting, the story they told wasn't one of survival against impossible odds. It was something else, something far darker. Because Eliza Hartman hadn't just endured the cave, she had shaped it, she had ruled it, and in those pages, her voice emerged not as a victim, but as something entirely different. That was the first truth unearthed. The second, the twist no one could have imagined, would come later. But by then, the families would already be questioning everything they thought they knew about their children, about friendship, and about the line between protection and possession. And the world would be left with one terrifying question. How many other Elizas are out there, hiding behind the mask of a savior, while quietly destroying the very people they claimed to love? The cave was silent, heavy with the smell of damp stone and mildew, when the evidence team found it. A crude wooden shelf leaned against the wall, built from scavenged branches and scraps. And there, stacked neatly as though waiting to be discovered, were several weathered notebooks wrapped in a tattered sleeping bag. The pages had been carefully preserved. Every line of ink was legible, every word intact. The handwriting was unmistakably Eliza Hartman's, controlled, sharp, the kind of script professors once praised for its clarity. But the story those pages told would shake even the most hardened investigators. April 15th, 2018. We were following Connor off the main trail when the ground gave way. A hidden opening, covered by leaves. Connor fell first, maybe 15 feet. I heard the snap of bone before I even saw him. His leg. It's bad. Lila hit her head on the way down. There's blood everywhere. The hole we fell through collapsed behind us. I can see daylight above, maybe 20 feet, but the walls are smooth. No way to climb. We're trapped. Her words were clinical at first, like notes from a field medic. Eliza described how she stabilized Connor's leg with strips of fabric torn from her jacket, how she kept Lila awake through the night to monitor her concussion. Even in panic, she had taken control. We have no gear, no food, no water, just the clothes on our backs. We were supposed to be scouting before setting up camp. God, what have I done? Those first pages read like the desperate record of someone fighting to survive. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, a subtle shift crept into her voice. June 2018. I found a water source today. A trickle dripping from a rock seam. I think it's safe if boiled. Connor is still in pain, but the swelling is better. Lila forgets things sometimes. She repeats the same questions. Where are we? When are we going home? I tell her we'll be okay. I don't know if I believe it. July 2018. There are fungi here. I tested them on myself first. Still alive after 24 hours. Edible. We can survive here if we're careful. Maybe long enough for rescue. Maybe forever. When Agent Dana Kessler read those entries aloud in the FBI field office, Frank Hale sat rigid in his chair. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. Hearing his son's suffering filtered through Eliza's matter-of-fact narration was unbearable. She kept records like she was proud of it, Frank muttered. But the entries didn't stop at survival. The deeper the investigators read, the more disturbing they became. August 20th, 2018. Found a passage today. Narrow, but I think it leads upward. Connor wants to try it when he's stronger. Lila is terrified. I told him it looks unstable. Too dangerous. That was a lie. It's safe. I just don't want to leave yet. For the first time in my life, no one expects anything from me here. No grades. No exams. No med school applications. I'm not Eliza, the future doctor. I'm just Eliza, and I like it. Is it wrong that I want to stay a little longer? Agent Kessler stopped reading. The room had gone still. For months, the families had prayed that their children were alive underground. They were working together to escape. But Eliza's words told a different story, a chilling confession. From that point forward, her journals began to blur the line between protector and captor. March 2019. Connor is stronger now. He thinks he can explore more passages. Yesterday, he found another possible exit. Lila was excited. She started talking about seeing her mom again. I told him it was too risky, that the rocks would collapse. Another lie. I've mapped at least 4 safe routes to the surface. But Connor's leg will never heal properly without surgery. Lila's memory problems make her fragile. Out there, they'll be broken. Down here, they're perfect. Why should I take them back to a world that will only hurt them? To the investigators, it became clear. Eliza hadn't simply adapted to life underground. She had embraced it. Every decision she recorded, every risk she exaggerated, was another step in binding Connor and Lila to her. Dr. Helena Marquez, the FBI's consulting psychologist, leaned back in her chair as she read. This is deliberate, classic dependency conditioning. She wasn't just surviving. She was creating a world where she was indispensable. The journal revealed the turning point. September 2019. Lila tried to follow me through the North Passage today. I had to bring her back. She had a breakdown halfway up, screaming, clawing, begging to return to the dark. Connor blamed her fear of open spaces. He doesn't know I've been planning the idea for months, that the surface is hostile, that people will judge her, that her family has already moved on. She believes it now. She believes me. By the time investigators reached this entry, a chill had settled over the room. Eliza hadn't just stumbled into leadership. She had weaponized it. She conditioned Lila's agoraphobia, reinforced Connor's dependence on her, and systematically destroyed their hope of leaving. Frank Hale slammed his fist against the table. She lied to him. She lied to my son every damn day. But even Frank didn't yet know the half of it, because tucked in the back of the journals, the evidence team found something else. Loose sheets in Connor's handwriting. His secret entries. 2019, Maya lied about the blocked passage. I crawled through it myself when she was asleep. It leads straight to a trail. 3 hours and we'd be home. When I confronted her, she cried, said she was protecting us, that Lila couldn't handle the outside world. She said my parents would blame me for getting us lost. But I see the way she looks at Lila now, like she owns her. I think Eliza doesn't want us to be found. I think she wants us to stay lost. The family sat in stunned silence. For the first time, Connor's voice was heard again, not as a helpless victim, but as someone who saw through Eliza's lies. His words transformed the entire narrative. What had seemed like an accident of survival was now revealed as something far darker, a prison without bars, maintained not by force, but by manipulation. And this was only the beginning. The journal stretched on for years, documenting not only how Eliza kept them underground, but how she broke them piece by piece. Each entry was a brick in the cage she built around her friends. And as investigators turned the pages, they began to see the shape of the horror more clearly. But buried in those pages, among the lies and confessions, was a truth even darker than the rest. Something that wouldn't be uncovered until much later. For now, the families were left with a question that chilled them to the core. What if Eliza Hartman hadn't just let their children die in the dark? What if she had needed them to? The cavern did not echo like the others. That was the first thing Connor Hale noticed. In most caves, every sound, the crunch of boots, the drag of a rope, the nervous laughter of his friends, bounced and carried. But here, in the hollow chamber Maya Hartman had chosen for them to rest, the silence swallowed their voices whole. It was as though the stone itself had decided to absorb their words, hiding them from the world above. He sat near the dripping wall, one hand pressed against his ribs where the pain still throbbed from the fall 2 days earlier. Maya had told him it was nothing more than a bruise, that he needed to stop exaggerating, that he was stronger than he believed. Yet every inhale felt like a knife cutting between his bones. He wasn't sure if it was a cracked rib or fear gnawing at him from within. Lila Moreno crouched nearby, sketchbook balanced on her knee. Her pencil traced frantic lines, faces, shadows, something that resembled an open mouth in the rock. She had always drawn to cope with stress, but now there was something compulsive about it, almost feverish. The pages were filling up with twisted impressions of the cave, like her mind was reshaping reality to match Maya's constant monologues about surrendering to the stone. Don't you feel it? Maya's voice echoed faintly from the chamber's edge. She stood where a beam of sunlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling, her arms stretched out as if basking in divine warmth. Her hair glowed like a halo, and in that moment she didn't look like a college student at all. She looked like a prophet. This place chose us. The silence, the darkness. It's stripping away the noise of the world. We're not lost. We've been found. Lila's eyes glazed with something between awe and terror. Connor felt his stomach twist. He wanted to protest, to tell Maya she was wrong, that they needed to find their way out before dehydration and hypothermia set in. But every time he opened his mouth, Maya's stare cut him down. It was a strange power, half charm, half venom. She made him doubt his instincts. She made him doubt himself. The days blurred. Connor tried to keep track by scratching lines into the cavern wall with a piece of rock. 1 line, 2 lines. By the time he reached 5, he wasn't sure if they'd been there 5 days or 10. Time dissolved in the cave's perpetual darkness. Food ran thin. The energy bars they carried had been rationed poorly. Maya insisted on controlling the portions, declaring herself responsible for their survival. She handed out slivers like communion wafers, eyes shining, as though feeding them was proof of her calling. "You see," she whispered one night as they huddled around a flickering lantern, "the world above never gave us enough. But here, even a bite feels divine. This cave is teaching us gratitude, dependence, unity." Lila nodded, tears streaking her cheeks, clinging to Maya's every word like scripture. Connor chewed silently, the taste of stale oats sticking to his throat. He didn't trust her. He couldn't. But his injured ribs kept him from challenging her control. In the silence of the cavern, Maya had grown louder, stronger. She was weaving the darkness into a cocoon around them. The first real fracture came on the 7th day. They had been moving deeper, Maya guiding them with unwavering certainty, when Connor noticed carvings. At first they seemed like scratches in stone, clumsy lines gouged into the walls. But then he saw shapes, letters, a name, half eroded by moisture. David. He froze. There was no David in their group. "Who wrote this?" he asked, his voice low, but sharp enough to pierce the silence. Maya turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter. It's just a mark from some hiker who wandered here years ago." But Connor wasn't convinced. The letters were too fresh. The groove still sharp. Someone else had been here, recently. That night, he whispered his suspicions to Lila as she sketched. Her hands trembled, shading a shadowy figure that loomed taller than any of them. "Maya told me." Lila's voice cracked. "She told me the cave keeps what it wants. Maybe David was one of them. Maybe he never left." Connor felt a chill crawl across his skin. On the 9th night, the sound came. It started faint, like a sigh drifting through the tunnels. Then it grew louder, ragged, uneven. Breathing. Human breathing. Connor snapped awake. His injured ribs screamed, but adrenaline silenced the pain. He held his breath, straining to listen. Across the chamber, Lila stirred, eyes wide with terror. She heard it too. The sound grew closer. Scraping. A shuffle of feet against stone. "Stay calm," Maya said softly, though her eyes gleamed with something Connor couldn't name. Excitement? Fear? Faith? The cave is speaking to us. "No!" Connor hissed. "That's someone here. Someone alive." Before Maya could respond, a figure staggered into the edge of the lantern's glow. It was a man, gaunt, pale, eyes wild. His beard was matted, his clothes torn, and his lips cracked as though he hadn't seen sunlight in years. He blinked at them, whispering a name Connor didn't recognize. "Sarah?" Lila let out a broken sob. Connor felt bile rise in his throat. The stranger dropped to his knees, clutching the ground like it might swallow him whole. And then he collapsed. Connor rushed forward despite the pain in his ribs, checking the man's pulse. Still alive, barely. "Who the hell is he?" Connor demanded. But Maya only smiled, her eyes shining like the beam of sunlight that never reached this chamber. "He's proof," she whispered. "The cave keeps its chosen." For Connor, the truth slammed harder than his fall. They weren't the first to be lost here, and Maya had known all along. At first, Connor thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. The sound was faint, like a low groan carried on air currents that shouldn't have existed this far underground. The cavern was supposed to be sealed, unmoving, but the vibration seeped into the stone itself. So deep he felt it in his bones rather than his ears. Lila Moreno clutched her sketchbook to her chest, tears streaking down her cheeks. "It's real," she whispered. "I heard it too." Maya Hartman stood taller, her eyes gleaming with eerie conviction. She spread her arms as if embracing the darkness, her voice ringing with something close to ecstasy. "You see? The cave has spoken." "No," Connor snapped, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. That wasn't the cave. It was air pressure, rock settling, something explainable. Daniel stirred from his place on the ground, skeletal fingers twitching against the dirt. His face was pale and hollow, but his eyes blazed with terror. "It's her," he rasped. "Sarah. She's still calling." The name hung in the chamber like a noose. Connor felt the fine hairs on his arms stand up. He wanted to dismiss it, to call it the ramblings of a man broken by years in the dark, but the fear in Daniel's voice was too raw, too human. The hours that followed bled together in silence, broken only by drips of water and Daniel's restless muttering. He wouldn't sleep. He kept glancing toward the tunnel where the sound had come from, whispering Sarah's name like a prayer or a curse. Maya stayed close to him, her hand often resting lightly on his shoulder, but Connor saw through it. She wasn't comforting him. She was feeding off him, weaving his fear into her theology. "She is still here," Maya said softly to Lila, her voice deliberate, steady. Not as flesh, but as presence. The cave kept her, and now it speaks through her. "Do you understand what that means?" Lila nodded, her pencil scratching feverishly across a new page. Connor glimpsed a drawing. Dark spirals, a mouth yawning open, teeth carved into stone. He wanted to rip the notebook from her hands, but the desperation in her face stopped him. "That night," the voice returned. This time it came in bursts, long, guttural moans followed by silence, so sharp it rang in Connor's ears. He pressed his palms to the floor, feeling the vibration run through the rock. It wasn't just sound, it was movement, something shifting deep below. Daniel curled into himself, sobbing. She's still alive. After all this time, she's still waiting. Maya crouched beside him, her tone rich with authority. "No, Daniel, she is not waiting. She is transcended, and so will we if we stop resisting." Connor's temper snapped. "Stop it, Maya. You're twisting everything. He's broken, he's starving, he's traumatized, and you're using him to spread your poison." The cavern swallowed his shout, turning it into something hollow and fragile. Maya didn't flinch. She turned her gaze on him, calm and piercing, like a teacher correcting a wayward child. "Connor," she said evenly, "it isn't poison to tell the truth. The cave strips away illusions. Above ground, you cling to logic, to rules. But down here, those things mean nothing. Down here, only faith matters. Her voice had the cadence of a sermon. Lila trembled, torn between Connor's defiance and Maya's certainty. For the first time, Connor realized the danger wasn't just Maya's words. It was how easily the darkness gave them power. On the 13th day, the food ran out. The final ration bar was broken into 3 slivers, distributed by Maya like communion wafers. She kept none for herself, which only deepened Lila's devotion. "You see," Maya said as she handed Connor his portion, "sacrifice proves the cave has chosen me to lead." Connor chewed the stale fragment, bitterness rising in his throat. She was playing a long game, starving them, wearing them down until they surrendered. Daniel refused his share. He pushed the food away with trembling hands, eyes distant. "She doesn't eat any more," he whispered. "Why should I?" His body was collapsing. He shook constantly, lips cracked, nails broken. Connor wanted to help him, but he knew Daniel's mind had already wandered into some place beyond saving. That night, the voice came again. Louder, clearer. Connor sat upright, every nerve in his body sparking. This time, it wasn't just moaning. It was words. A name, drawn out in a guttural wail. "Connor." Lila screamed, dropping her pencil. The sound echoed, so sharply it felt like the walls closed in around them. Daniel clawed at his ears, shrieking, "She knows your name. She knows your name." Connor froze. His breath caught in his throat. The voice hadn't been Sarah's. It couldn't have been. It was too deep, too distorted. But the syllables had been clear. The cave had spoken his name. And Maya smiled. The days spiraled after that. Connor lost track of sleep, of time, of himself. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the echo, his name dragging through stone. Lila began sketching him obsessively, her drawings distorted. His eyes hollow, his mouth sewn shut, his body swallowed by rock. She cried as she drew, but she couldn't stop. Daniel weakened until he could barely sit upright. He spoke less, but when he did, it was only one phrase, repeated like a mantra. "Don't answer her." Connor asked who he meant, but Daniel never explained. Maya, meanwhile, grew stronger. She moved with certainty, her words steady, her faith unshakable. The other's weakness seemed to fuel her, like she was feeding on their despair. "The cave has chosen," she whispered one night, her face lit by the dim lantern glow. "And it is calling for you, Connor." Her eyes burned with triumph. Connor lay in the darkness, chest tight with fear. For the first time since entering the cavern, he wondered if Maya wasn't just manipulating them. He wondered if she was right. Connor Hale woke to the sound of scratching. It was faint at first, like an insect trapped in the cracks of the cavern wall. But as he blinked through the gloom, the sound grew sharper, deliberate, rhythmic. Someone was carving. His eyes adjusted to the dim flicker of the dying lantern. Lila Moreno sat against the far wall, hunched over with her pencil. She wasn't sketching on paper this time. She was gouging into the stone itself, dragging graphite against rough rock until the tip snapped. She didn't even pause. She sharpened it with her teeth, bleeding at the gums, then continued. Connor forced himself up, every bone aching, and limped toward her. "What are you doing?" She didn't look at him. The markings stretched across the wall like sprawling veins, names, symbols, jagged spirals converging into a dark pit at the center. At the pit's edge, she had written one word over and over until the stone was slick with shattered graphite. "Connor." Her voice was hoarse. "She says this is the only way to keep you safe." Connor recoiled. "Who told you that?" Lila finally lifted her face. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her eyes burned with a strange devotion. "Maya, and the cave." Maya Hartman appeared behind him like a shadow. She moved silently now, always watching, always listening. "Don't interfere," she said, her tone calm but edged with steel. "She's channeling what the cave demands." Connor's jaw tightened. "She's destroying herself." "She's transcending," Maya corrected. "Do you want her fragile, broken, or do you want her chosen?" He spun on her, his voice sharp. "You're not saving her. You're breaking her the way you broke Daniel." At the sound of his name, Daniel stirred weakly from the corner. His skin clung to bone, his chest rattling with each breath. He muttered something too soft to catch. Connor knelt beside him, desperate. "Daniel, talk to me. Tell me what's happening." Daniel's eyes rolled toward him, watery and wild. "It knows you. Don't listen. Don't answer." His bony hand gripped Connor's wrist with startling strength. "Promise me. Don't answer." Then he slumped back, coughing violently until blood stained his lips. Maya knelt beside him, brushing his hair from his forehead, like a mother soothing a fevered child. "Hush," she whispered. "The cave is cleansing you." Connor wanted to scream. He wanted to tear her away, to shake sense into Lila, to drag Daniel up to the passages Maya swore were blocked. But every time he imagined climbing out, the voice returned, low, guttural, echoing in his skull. That night, Connor couldn't sleep. His ribs throbbed, his throat was parched, but worse than the pain was the dread. The voice didn't come from one place anymore. It seeped from everywhere. The ceiling, the walls, the ground beneath his palms. He pressed his hands to his ears, but it burrowed deeper, bypassing flesh. Connor. He clenched his teeth until they hurt. He told himself it was echoes, hallucination, stress. But the sound carried intent. It wasn't meaningless vibration. It was summoning. And worse, Maya knew it. He caught her watching him across the dim chamber, her eyes glinting with something more than faith. It was hunger. The 15th day broke them. They had no food left. Water dripped slow and scarce from a calcite seam, barely enough to wet their tongues. Lila stopped sketching altogether, her hands trembling too violently to hold a pencil. Daniel lay unmoving, a ghost clinging to breath. Connor tried to count hours, to measure time by the lantern's fuel. But everything blurred. His body weakened, but his mind was what terrified him most. He found himself answering questions no one had asked, muttering replies into silence. Once, when the voice whispered his name again, he almost spoke back. Almost. Maya hovered closer each time it happened, her presence suffocating. She whispered scripture of her own making, words twisted into doctrine. Faith is surrender. Resistance is pride. The cave calls only those it has chosen. Her hand brushed his shoulder, light but deliberate. And it has chosen you, Connor. On the 17th day, Daniel's strength gave out. Connor woke to find him rigid, eyes glassy, his lips parted mid-breath that would never come. Lila wailed, clawing at her face. Connor rushed to her, holding her as she shook violently. But she broke free and threw herself over Daniel's body, sobbing. Maya knelt beside the corpse, her expression serene. She closed his eyes with 2 fingers and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "The cave has received him," she said, voice soft but resolute. "He resisted too long. Now he is free." Connor felt something shatter inside him. His stomach twisted with grief, guilt, rage. "Free," he spat. "He's dead because of you." Maya looked up, meeting his eyes without flinching. "No, he's dead because he fought his destiny. Do you want to follow him, or do you want to be what the cave needs?" Her words weren't just manipulation anymore. They were threat. They buried Daniel beneath a pile of loose stone. Lila carved spirals into the rocks with shaking hands, whispering prayers Maya fed her like a ventriloquist through a doll. When it was done, Connor sat in the dark, every breath a battle. He thought of Frank Hale, his father, searching above. He thought of sunlight, of air, of freedom. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Daniel's face, contorted in agony, begging him not to answer. And still, beneath it all, the voice whispered, persistent, inescapable. "Connor." It was patient. It would wait forever if it had to. And deep down, Connor feared that one day soon, he would finally reply. The summer heat in Ashwood was oppressive in June of 2025, but inside the Hale Caverns, the air was damp and cold, the kind of chill that seeped into bone and marrow. Agent Dana Kessler stood at the cave mouth with her helmet light off, letting her eyes adjust to the twilight. She felt a familiar pull, the same tug she had felt when she'd first started chasing missing persons cases. The sense that the cave wasn't just a place of rock and silence, but a predator waiting to swallow those foolish enough to step inside. Behind her, Frank Hale's voice broke the tension. You'll find her this time. I don't care what it takes. He wasn't talking about Eliza. He was talking about his son. Even though Connor's skeletal remains had been identified, Frank refused to believe that was the full story. To him, Connor wasn't gone until the cave gave back the truth of what had happened. And Agent Kessler couldn't argue, because she, too, felt it. That Connor's story wasn't finished. The expedition wasn't large. Kessler brought Ranger Sofia Delgado, 2 cave rescue specialists, and a forensic photographer. The others stayed outside, where the summer cicadas droned like static. Frank Hale wanted to go in, but his injured knee and shaking hands betrayed him. He stood at the tree lean, a silent silhouette, watching them disappear into the earth. The descent was different this time. They weren't just searching for scraps or confirming what they already knew. They were following Eliza Hartman's map, tracing a line no modern scanner had caught. The tunnel it marked was supposed to be impossible, a passage sealed by collapse, impenetrable even to drones. Yet as Delgado pushed her light along the limestone walls, she noticed a faint draft brushing her cheek. "There's airflow here," she said, running a gloved hand over what looked like a smooth wall. "The collapse isn't solid. There's a gap behind it." The specialist went to work. Hours of scraping, prying, and carefully dislodging stone revealed what the cave had tried to conceal, a jagged slip barely wide enough for a human body to squeeze through. Kessler's gut tightened. Eliza had drawn this place in her journal. She had known. The new tunnel was narrower than the rest, forcing them to crawl on their bellies. Helmet lights scraped across stone, shadows bending unnaturally in confined space. The air smelled stale metallic, like old blood and rust. Halfway through, Delgado froze. "Do you hear that?" Kessler tilted her head. At first, she thought it was her own pulse thudding in her ears. But no, the sound was real. A faint drip of water. And beneath it, something else. A scratching, rhythmic and deliberate, like fingernails dragged over stone. Her breath caught in her throat. "Keep moving," she whispered. The team squeezed through until the tunnel suddenly opened into a chamber that hadn't seen light in centuries. Their helmet beams cut through the black, landing on stalagmites slick with condensation. But what drew everyone's attention wasn't the stone, it was the walls. Carvings. Hundreds of them. Names etched into the limestone with jagged strokes. Some were familiar. Connor, Lila, Eliza. Others were strangers. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of names no one recognized. Some were crossed out with deep, violent gouges. Others were circled, as if claimed. Delgado's voice trembled. This wasn't just a map. It was a record. In the center of the chamber lay what looked like a crude altar of stacked stone. And resting on top of it, preserved in a plastic pouch just like the journal, was a photograph. The team crowded closer. It was Lila Moreno, her face gaunt, eyes hollow, her hair matted and wild. She was alive in the photo, no doubt about it. But the background behind her wasn't natural cave. It was this chamber. And scrawled across the bottom of the photo in black ink was a phrase that made Kessler's stomach drop. She chose to stay. The forensic photographer snapped images, his hands shaking. Delgado muttered, "This doesn't make sense. If Lila survived, why didn't she come out? Why leave this here?" Kessler's mind raced. The carvings, the journal, the photo, none of it pointed to random chance. It pointed to design. Someone had wanted this found. Someone had orchestrated not just survival, but a story. That was when she noticed the newest name carved into the wall. It wasn't Connor. It wasn't Lila. It was hers. Dana Kessler. Etched so recently the limestone dust still clung to the grooves. Her stomach lurched. She staggered back, her helmet light swinging wildly across the chamber. "We're leaving," she snapped. "Now." But the sound of movement behind them stopped her cold. The scratching they had heard earlier grew louder. This time, it wasn't from the walls. It was from the tunnel they'd just crawled through. Something, or someone, was in there with them. The cave swallowed their breaths. The photographer fumbled his camera, the flash going off in a burst of white that lit the chamber for a split second. In that instant, Kessler swore she saw a figure at the tunnel's mouth. Thin, hair hanging in wet clumps. eyes catching the light like an animal's. When the flash faded, the tunnel was empty, but the scratching continued. They scrambled out, hearts pounding, dragging their equipment with them. The narrow crawl felt endless. Stones scraping helmets, every sound magnified to a roar in their ears. At one point, Delgado screamed. Something brushed her boot. When they burst back into the main cavern, the air felt alive with static, as if the cave itself had been holding its breath. Outside, Frank Hale rushed forward, searching their faces for answers. But Kessler could barely speak. She shoved the photo into his hands. He stared at it, his knees buckling. She was alive? Lila was alive. Kessler didn't answer. Because the real question wasn't whether Lila had survived. The real question was whether she was still down there. That night, Kessler sat alone in her motel room, the photo on the table in front of her. She couldn't shake the image of her own name carved into the wall. Someone had marked her. Someone had known she would come. And as she closed her eyes, she heard it again, the faint scratching echoing in her mind. Not behind her, not in the cave, but inside her own head. By the time dawn rose over Ashwood the next morning, the town was already on fire, digitally, at least. The photograph of Lila Moreno, recovered from the underground altar, had leaked. No one knew how. Maybe a rescuer with a guilty conscience had slipped it to a journalist. Maybe someone close to the investigation thought the public deserved to see. But by 7 a.m., the image was everywhere, on Facebook timelines and Reddit threads, splashed across the front page and national news sites under headlines like, "The Girl Who Never Left, Cave Photo Shocks Investigation." For years, Ashwood had lived with the ghosts of the missing students. Now the ghost had a face, Lila's gaunt, haunted face, and with the photo came the theories. She survived down there for 7 years. How? She didn't survive. That picture staged. Eliza Hartman made her stay. This was some kind of cult thing. No, you don't understand. The cave chooses who leaves. Agent Dana Kessler sat in her unmarked car outside the sheriff's office, watching the madness unfold to her phone screen. Every minute that passed brought another wave of speculation. She worked dozens of missing person cases, but none had metastasized like this. The cave wasn't just a crime scene anymore. It was an infection, spreading into living rooms and news feeds across the country. Ranger Sophia Delgado slammed the passenger door and handed her a coffee. "We've lost control of the story," she said flatly. Kessler nodded. "We never had it." But she wasn't just worried about the narrative. She was worried about the marks carved into the limestone, the names, especially her own. Someone had anticipated her. Someone had wanted her to come. And now, half the country was daring itself to do the same. By mid-afternoon, the Hale Caverns had turned into a carnival of fear. News vans crowded the dirt roads. Paranormal YouTubers live-streamed outside the cave mouth, flashing their GoPros as if they could capture ghosts. Teenagers from nearby towns posted TikToks of themselves creeping into the shallower tunnels, whispering, "Say her name and she'll appear." Frank Hale stood at the edge of it all, his face a mask of exhaustion and fury. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He clutched the photo of Lila like it was a lifeline, showing it to anyone who would listen. "They're hiding the truth," he told a small knot of reporters. "The FBI knows more than they're saying. My son didn't just die in there. Something was done to him. To all of them." The cameras ate it up. Clips of Frank's outburst looped on cable news all evening, framed as the anguished cries of a grieving father. Or, in the darker corners of the internet, as the warning of a man who knew too much. Meanwhile, Dr. Helena Marquez was poring over the journal again, searching for patterns the team might have missed. She circled one line in red and slid across the table to Kessler. "Soon, she'll be ready to take my place." "Who is Eliza talking about?" Marquez asked. "Connor? Lila? Or someone else entirely?" Kessler's throat tightened. She remembered the figure at the tunnel's mouth, the eyes glinting in the dark. "She's still here," she whispered. Marquez frowned. "What?" Kessler shook her head, shutting the thought away. "Nothing. Keep looking." That night, Ashwood's power grid flickered under the weight of its own hysteria. Every diner booth was filled with whispered speculation. Parents yanked kids inside before dark. The sheriff doubled patrols around the caves, but it didn't matter. There were too many thrill seekers, too many obsessed strangers. And in the quiet back streets, something even darker was happening. Frank Hale received a letter. No stamp, no return address, just his name scrawled in jagged handwriting. He tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Connor isn't gone. The cave keeps what it wants. If you want to see for yourself, come alone. A map was drawn beneath the words. A map that matched Eliza Hartman's sketch perfectly. Frank's heart thundered. His rational mind screamed it was a hoax. But the father in him, the man who had lived 7 years with a sun-shaped hole inside him, couldn't look away. By morning, Frank was gone, his truck abandoned at the trailhead. Kessler got the call just after 9 a.m. Delgado's voice was sharp with panic. He went in Dana. He went in alone. Kessler slammed her fist against the motel desk. Damn it, Frank. Marquez pressed her hand to her mouth. This is exactly what she wanted. Whoever left that map, they're luring people back. Kessler felt the cold certainty sink into her chest. The cave hadn't just claimed the students in 2018. It wasn't finished. It was still hungry. The search for Frank Hale mobilized quickly. Deputies, rangers, even volunteer climbers flooded the entrance. But the cave mocked them, swallowing radios, scattering their shouts into echoes. Hours passed, and still no sign of him. Until just before dusk, when Delgado's team found something wedged in a crack of the main cavern wall. It was another photo, this time of Frank himself, his face pale in the camera's flash, his eyes wide with terror. And in the background, barely visible, a shadow leaned into the frame. Thin, hair wild, mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. When Kessler saw the image, her blood went cold. It wasn't Eliza. It was Lila, alive. The photo of Frank Hale spread through the command post like a contagion. Deputies who had once scoffed at the idea of curses now refused to re-enter the caverns. Reporters outside smelled blood in the water and broadcast rumors as fact. Frank Hale found alive, one headline blared, while another whispered, second survivor emerges. But inside the sheriff's office, Agent Dana Kessler studied the photo until her eyes ached. The details gnawed at her. The angle, the lighting, the uncanny similarity to the earlier image of Lila Moreno. These weren't selfies, she said quietly. Someone else took them. Dr. Helena Marquez's voice was a whisper, which means at least one person's been down there this entire time, still alive. At dawn, Kessler led a stripped-down team into the caves. No cameras, no live streamers, no reporters, just her, Delgado, and 3 trusted climbers. The air inside was colder than before, as if the caverns themselves had shifted in the night. They descended past a chamber where Eliza Hartman's journals had been recovered, past a stone altar where Lila had once been forced to kneel. The walls felt closer now, the silence heavier. At the base of a narrow shaft, Delgado froze. Dana, she whispered. There, against the wall, was Frank Hale's flashlight. Still glowing, still warm, but no Frank. They pressed deeper. The tunnels forked and twisted, leading them through chambers that looked eerily staged, blankets spread as though someone had just risen, food scraps arranged with ritual precision. Kessler's stomach tightened. It felt like someone wanted them to see. Finally, they reached the North Passage, the one Eliza had mentioned in her journals, the route she'd always described as too dangerous. Delgado's hand shook as she brushed dust from the limestone. Carved into the wall was a fresh set of words, jagged and frantic. She is not who you think she is. Kessler stepped back, pulse hammering. The question wasn't whether Lila had survived. The question was what she had become. They found Frank an hour later. Alive, but barely. He was crouched in a shallow alcove, rocking like a child, his lips moving without sound. His clothes were shredded, his face streaked with mud. When he saw Kessler, he lunged forward and clutched her jacket. His voice cracked into a hoarse scream. She kept me. She wouldn't let me leave. I thought it was Eliza. God help me. I thought it was Eliza, but it's her. Dana, it's Lila. She doesn't want to come out. She wants us all to stay. Delgado tried to steady him, but Frank collapsed against a stone, sobbing. His fingernails were torn and bloody, as though he'd been dragged. And then Kessler heard it, the faint scrape of movement deeper in the passage. They followed the sound. Their flashlights sliced across stone until, suddenly, a figure emerged from the dark. It was Lila Moreno, but not the Lila from the photos. This Lila stood tall, her hair matted into ropes, her eyes reflecting the beams like an animal's. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice carrying strangely in the chamber. Kessler raised a hand. "Lila, we're here to help. You don't have to stay down here anymore." Lila tilted her head, almost amused. "Help?" That's what Eliza said. But Eliza was weak. She wanted to be God, but gods don't die. Gods transform. She made me strong. Her gaze swept across the group, and Kessler felt the weight of it. Predatory, calculating. "You came looking for victims," Lila whispered. "But what if I've been waiting for recruits?" The climbers raised their radios, calling for extraction, but the signal died in static. The air seemed to collapse around them, as if the cave itself refused to release the sound. Lila stepped closer, her bare feet soundless on the rock. "Connor begged Eliza to take him home," she said softly. "But he didn't beg me. He begged me to finish what she started. He knew the surface would tear us apart. Down here, we were whole. We still can be." Delgado whispered, "She's gone. This isn't her anymore." But Kessler wasn't sure. She saw flashes of the terrified girl from the journals, flashes of someone broken and remade in the dark. And then Lila's smile widened. "You'll understand soon. The cave always gets what it wants." The team retreated, dragging Frank with them, but Lila didn't follow. She simply stood in the shadows, watching, until the darkness swallowed her whole. By the time they surfaced, Frank had collapsed into shock. His words spilled out in fragments. Eliza's lies, the years underground, the slow, horrifying realization that when Eliza finally weakened, Lila had taken her place. She wanted it. Frank whispered through cracked lips. She wanted to stay. She chose to. The official report would later describe Lila Moreno as missing, presumed deceased. The caves were sealed with iron gates, federal jurisdiction posted at every entrance. But in Ashwood, rumors bloomed like mold. Some said Lila was still down there, waiting. Others swore she'd already left, that she walked the forest at night, watching for anyone foolish enough to wander too close. And then there were those who believed something darker, that the cave itself wasn't just stone, but a hunger, that Eliza had been its servant, and Lila its heir. Weeks later, as the media storm finally cooled, Agent Dana Kessler returned to the cavern one last time. She stood at the sealed gate, staring into blackness. On the rock face, she noticed something new, a fresh carving, deep, ragged, unmistakable. "Welcome home, Dana." Her breath caught, because the carving hadn't been there before, and because the handwriting wasn't Eliza's, it was Lila's. And so the story closed not with resolution, but with dread. Connor Hale was gone. Eliza Hartman's twisted reign had ended. But Lila Moreno, the fragile girl turned captive, turned survivor, turned something else entirely, was still out there. Not lost, not broken, but waiting.